Hello, Paul James here, reporting to you from the beautiful city of Toronto. CN Tower in the background. I'm about to read a letter to the Prime Minister and the Attorney General of Canada. It's appropriate for all Canadian MPs, for all Canadian citizens, and particularly for those people who've had the indignity to have ever suffered from a substance use disorder or substance addiction. Anybody from around the world that wants to know about the Paul James story, please follow through with listening to this video. And at the end, I'm going to describe to you a couple of instances of what I mean by a stigmatizing cut. So I'll walk over here now and read a letter to you. Read a letter to you in response to the correspondence I got from the Attorney General of Canada. Again, I ask you to bear with me. It's about 4 pages, 5 pages, but I think you will find it riveting. Dear Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould, thank you for the response to my June 26, 2017 correspondence. I acknowledge your regret for not replying sooner. It is, however, unreasonable for any right-minded Canadian citizen to conclude the sincerity of this communication with consideration of the original content of my June 26 letter to the Right Honourable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the 77 days it took for the reply to arrive. The pain and terror of my 4th hunger strike, 26 days, was immense and could have been prevented had the Prime Minister responded and addressed my request for an investigation into my life and the criminal way I've been treated by York University, the Canadian judicial system, the Canadian soccer industry, the Canadian Soccer Association, and now, ironically, the Liberal Government of Canada. While you have suggested I may consider going to the Attorney General of Ontario, who oversees the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario, I respectfully remind you my case went through 3 levels of the Canadian court system beyond the HR20, including the Supreme Court of Canada. This matter is beyond the tribunal jurisdiction and the Canadian lower court system. I am sure you can appreciate also I have a profound, justifiable mistrust of the Canadian judicial process. With consideration of my current health and well-being, I can no longer be a part of a futile, rigged system in my regard. I will not be sent down any more cul-de-sacs, rabbit holes or traps. To borrow a phrase from my heritage, the Right Honourable Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the Canadian Government, York University, Malcolm Mercer from McCarthy Tétrault, the Canadian Soccer Association and the Honourable Chief Justice Beverly McLaughlin have failed to read the tea leaves in regards to Paul James and what poignantly lay ahead. You have failed to see the colossal damage and disgracefulness of what has happened. As an analogy, think of a person being stoned to death from sharp, jagged rocks, each rock ripping apart the body. That is what has happened to Paul James over the past 9 years and throughout this process of seeking fair access to social justice. The difference is that the cuts have been psychologically inflicted by all and sundry, the harm of which is both mental and physical. One sharp cut after another, some deeper than others, but all have been painful. Yet the system, including all 3 political parties, have just sat back and permitted it to happen. As a top psychologist from the Toronto Police Service said after reading my circumstances, she was surprised I hadn't committed suicide 10 times over. As a reminder, I requested on June 26 the Prime Minister and Canadian Government begin an immediate and complete investigation into the life of Paul James in order to correct the injustice which has taken place and hold those persons and organisations accountable for the devastation which has been deliberately caused to my life, to the life of my former partner Ashley Kelly, and to our beautiful dog Max. I did not request you intervene in the judicial process. The Prime Minister's non-reply was a perfect illustration of a deep cut, irresponsibly and deliberately inflicted by the leader of our country. As a consequence, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau was then sent on September the 5th, 2015, my request to renounce my Canadian citizenship, along with the annulment of my Canadian Soccer Hall of Fame status. You have failed to address this in your correspondence, which I, Ashley Kelly, and the Paul James Supporter Group request you do so now. Your reference instead to the Canadian court system confirms your deliberate avoidance of my requests. It also indicates you may not have read thoroughly the legal submissions I sent to the Prime Minister back in June. I cannot regurgitate a moment longer the case file in my regard. My human right to be treated equally and fairly and with dignity and respect has not only been infringed upon and abused at every single level, it has been obliterated. I refuse to justify this any further beyond what I write here. To the Right Honourable Prime Minister, I say again, while York University maintain the courts have ruled on the matter, and therefore through their own propaganda they have won the case, I say to you, so did Ben Johnson win a gold medal and Lance Armstrong win 7 Tour de France yellow jerseys. But they cheated, abused the system, were found out and held accountable. This is the York University circumstance. Overt deceit and collusion for which there can be no rebuttal. If you read the 78-page affidavit which was sent to the Supreme Court of Canada in 2016, you will be able to decipher that something is dreadfully wrong with the handling, adjudication and treatment of the Paul James claim before the Canadian courts. Yet, James Maloney, Liberal MP, rather than honourably dig for the truth, instead defended to a Paul James supporter the integrity of Justice Edwards from the Divisional Court of Ontario. Well, Justice Edwards cannot pick and choose when to display this integrity. James Maloney's suggestion does not equate to the fact that Justice Edwards can make serious errors on a file, be it unwitting or deliberate. One could view Justice Edwards as a remarkably skillful, highly manipulative justice. In my regard, for example, he played both sides. He left open all areas for the case to be won, including inappropriately ruling on the merits of the case with a conclusion that did not match the evidence submitted, nor did it meet the threshold of common sense. The other side, in what Justice Edwards presented in his decision rationale, took care of the political aspect of dealing with the power and wealth of the system. He appeared to be against the applicant, but in reality his errors were there to be corrected through honourable future adjudication. It is why the respondent went to such great lengths to undermine the process, including colluding with the National Post, and why the judicial process worked diligently and incestuously to assassinate and undermine a self-represented applicant with a bona fide mental health disorder. If you doubt this reality, then why did the Supreme Court of Canada Registrar remove Justice Edwards' highly prejudicial ruling on the merits of the claim from the Supreme Court of Canada case summary disseminated to the world, after I committed to sword fighting the Honourable Court on the issue over a dozen emails? They removed the statement not just because I objected to it, but because it was wrong and devastatingly damaging. If you require further confirmation on the credibility of the Paul James claim, then read the Divisional Court transcripts from March 4, 2015 and look at the comments and questions from Justice Sachs and Justice Hambley throughout. After 25 years of coaching, I can ferret out honourable good people in a heartbeat. Both justices were that. They understood the issue of the 1-year delay for filing a discrimination claim being a highly destructive systemic barrier, and they saw the extreme justice. They were skillful. The Divisional Court set the stage for the case to be won, but couldn't control the subsequent corruptness of York University and the legal counsel McCarthy takes role. Legal aspects aside, there were morality and ethical issues at stake in the Paul James matter I presented to the Prime Minister. His miscalculated non-response gives the sinister implication that he, the Liberal Government of Canada and York University, would prefer I died rather than correct the Paul James matter, which is unique enough in its totality to warrant a government investigation, not least because the positive impact on Canadian society through delivering social justice and/or resolution would penetrate many levels of Canadian inadequacy, including economic burden. The Liberal government and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau have failed me, and by association you have failed thousands of other Canadian citizens so highly stigmatised by their exposed mental health circumstances in the form of substance addiction. It is a precise illustration of what it is to be an exposed person with a substance disability, made worse if you confront any injustice delivered to you. You are shunned, ignored, patronised, scapegoated, discriminated against, prejudiced, defamed and ridiculed, leading to perpetual unemployment, poverty and a sense of worthlessness and hopelessness. Too many persons sharing these circumstances are powerless to the drudgery they are presented, because if you fight for your human right to be treated equally and fairly and with dignity and respect, I have proven you will be thwarted at every turn as you discover you have no legitimate, enforceable human rights. Irrespective of the rhetoric that is written and spoken from human rights commissions and even the Supreme Court of Canada, without applying the principles of law fairly and ethically, you can have no progress with improving the lives of those persons in the most oppressed minority group. My decision to balance the negotiating scales through the gruesome hunger strikes is a rational decision under the circumstances of such oppression, but also an indictment of so many in Canada. The Conservatives and NDP parties now have every right to take the Liberal government and York University to task for the decisions and handling of the Paul James matter. Both parties understand and appreciate the failure of the war on drugs maxim. They are smart enough to know, in line with the millennial age cohort, that you cannot have a war on inanimate things, and that unwittingly there has only ever been a war on people. The criminalised policies of the war on drugs ideology were ultimately put in place to assist people from harming themselves on such ruthless substances, but through a naive lack of knowledge, prohibition policies have created something far, far worse, an insurmountable stigma which is unrelenting in its brutality on those that suffer, defeating the purpose of making people's lives healthier in the first place. From Harvard University to Columbia University to Stanford to King's College in London to Simon Fraser in BC, you will not find an academic, neuroscientist or medical doctor specialising in substance addictions who will not adamantly conclude a substance use disorder is a human problem, not a criminal one, and that without decriminalisation you cannot get to square two in improving the circumstance on an individual or societal level, including economic impact. However, legalisation and or decriminalisation cannot be the sole answer without a cemented social safety net, which is realistic and fair, where the treatment of persons who become afflicted with addiction is supportive and not punitive, where organisations afford a person with an addiction every opportunity to regain good health without losing their career, and if when discrimination or prejudice takes place and is confronted, then accountability and responsibility is swift without overprotection of the Canadian judiciary for the perpetrators. These latter circumstances have deliberately not been adhered to in the Paul James matter, and instead have been subjected to dreadful treatment facilitated through an immoral, unethical academic Canadian institution, and a system which has corruptly protected them from catastrophic consequences to one Canadian citizen and those closest to him. How the Liberal government can lobby, canvass and push for ratification of marijuana legislation while at the same time ignoring the Paul James matter is unfathomable to any right Canadian citizen. Renouncing Canadian citizenship and Canadian Soccer Hall of Fame annulment. As alluded to previously, of particular concern to me at this time of my fifth hunger strike is your non-reference to the current issue at hand from September the 5th, 2017 letter I sent to the Prime Minister and the Canadian Soccer Association. In this September 5th correspondence, I have politely requested my Canadian citizenship be renounced by the Canadian Government and my Canadian Soccer Hall of Fame status be annulled by the Canadian Soccer Association, both with immediate effect. The decisions are symbolic clarification to all Canadians that I, Paul James, am ashamed to be living as a Canadian citizen and of ever representing Canada as a nation, both as a consequence of the way my life circumstances and myself as a person have been treated since 2008 when I sought help and assistance for my poor mental health. The subsequent 9 years of living as a known person with a substance disability, including 6 years in pursuit of social justice, have exposed me to extraordinary levels of discrimination, prejudice and mistreatment. The ultimate impact is best described through a parallel illustration. Billie Holiday, the exquisite jazz singer with a substance dependent to heroin, lost her right to sing and eventually her life, not because of the actual act of ingesting the substance itself, but because the authorities took her right to sing away and made her sure she died. It is breathtaking to me that over half a century later, we have not progressed on iota, as I am facing the same fate, albeit under different circumstances. They say the cruelest thing you can do to a person is to take away their passion, their purpose in life. My soccer career has been taken away, life ruined, not by the act of taking the substance or substance addiction itself, but the inadequacy, ignorance, selfishness, greed and inappropriateness of a Canadian academic institution, York University, a politically charged Canadian soccer industry, an irresponsible governing body of soccer, a judicial process which deliberately failed me, and a stigmatized, politicized Canadian society in need of serious repair and development in many areas. Most relevant here, the appropriate, dignified treatment of persons with substance addictions. And none of this can be improved without addressing the negative impact of the stigma of drug addiction. For that to happen, you need to first understand they are not just 4 words stitched together, but 4 words with devastating consequences. All MPs in all political parties need to review the Jane Elliott documentaries on YouTube, which will help you to unravel the errors which have been made in the Paul James matter and in the lives of millions of other Canadian citizens for far too long, including Rolf Ford. Substitute racism with substance addiction and replace the paper collar with a sharp spiked chain, and you will have a starting point to understand how I as a person have incrementally been brutalized and abused at every level of the Canadian system, which again has ruined my life, my career, my health, my reputation and everything else which matters to me. Without immediate correction and accountability, it will also take my life. At the very least, it already has shortened it. And consider, I am a white male with a profile sporting background. What chance does an Indigenous person or black female with a substance use disorder realistically have to prevent such oppression in mainstream Canadian society? They don't have any chance. And so they either don't enter mainstream, or if they do, they accept the oppression, which merely perpetuates the addiction cycle. You just need to check Bathurst, Queen, area of Toronto for confirmation. 101 stigmatizing cuts. Review of the ranking. 101 stigmatizing cuts, amongst 1,001 others, will reveal an anatomy of an absolute nightmare of prejudice, discrimination and abuse that never seems to end. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is on that list. So too are Liberal MPs James Maloney and Deborah Schultz, as is, gut-wrenchingly, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, the Honourable Beverly McLaughlin. From the Canadian Soccer Association, Nick Bontis, Victor Montagliani, Pat Santini, Jason DeVos, John Pugh, the full board of CSA directors are all represented, along with alumnus Andrew Oliveri, Stephen Hart, Dwayne De Rosario and Terry Dunfield. CIS President Graham Brown is included for his deceit disseminated to all CIS soccer coaches and his deliberate, unethical, immoral non-response to my request for his intervention based on documents I provided to him and my desperate plea for his communication during my first hunger strike. From the soccer industry, and in particular the soccer media, John Molinaro, Christian Jack, Lee Godfrey, James Sharman, Richard Whittle, Ben Rycroft, Ben Massey, Greta Young, David Norman and Anthony Tortera are represented for their coordinated, deliberate delivery of harm. From York University, Rick Weil, Mahmoud Sukri, Harriet Lewis, Maureen Armstrong, Lorna Marsden, Rob Tippin, Jen Myers, Sheila Forshaw, Gillian McCullough, Kim Matheny, Jamal Smith, Bree Carr-Harris, Jamie Texera and the Board of Governors are all represented. And from McCarthy Tétrault, Malcolm Mercer, Lisa Constantine and Jonathan Adumero illustrate the ruthlessness and arrogance of a law firm who have lost all sense of morality and ethical rigour. Ditto, the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario and the Human Rights Legal Support Centre, both representative of the collusion and coordinated efforts to not deliver justifiable justice to a self-represented applicant on an issue of discrimination towards a person's poor mental health. Do not take my word for it though. In regards to the latter two institutions, a careful, thorough review of the James versus Moordale Soccer Club claim will reveal the appalling behaviour of the tribunal system, the tribunal adjudicator and the Canadian law firm Borden, Ladner, Gervais in regards to the treatment of Paul James. Please note, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, you are not ranked #1 on the 101 stigmatizing cuts. That infamous honour rightly belongs to the coordinated efforts of York University by an almighty chasm of immorality, as they are the ultimate cause and effect of the devastation to so many. The 101 list is a shocking indictment of Canadian society's approach to just one person suffering the indignity of an exposed substance use disorder. The full list with explanations will be released this Sunday, September the 17th. For the Liberal government or any political party to not address the Paul James matter moving forward will be as irresponsible as what it would have been to not address the LGBTQ rights and the devastation of abuse on Indigenous people. Ironically, where in both instances substance addiction is an important issue and/or directly intertwined. And the devastating consequences of the 101 cuts are far-reaching beyond me as a person, as illustrated in this excerpt from an email I sent to a supporter who inquired about family support. My mother has been bedridden for the past 4 years with dementia. My father, who is in his mid-70s, has been devastated by what has happened to my mum and to me. His purpose in life as he aged was to follow me on TV when I was an analyst, and he used to watch all the York games I coached in. He was devastated when this was taken away. The stress is too much for my dad now. Dealing with my mum is bad enough. Meanwhile, my sister has a full house because she is a house cleaner, making only a little bit of money, which she supplements with billeting international students. She has been so devastated. She too has been devastated so much. She threw all my scrapbooks, photos and mementos away in a fit of anger. I was so devastated it was one of the very few times as a grown man I shed some tears. In spite of this, I still love my sister and my mum and dad, but I cannot be around them at this time. Stigma affects not just the person afflicted, but family and friends as well, as they become embarrassed at your circumstances and what people say. I am currently on a 5th hunger strike. "10 days in, and I am eating 600 to 800 calories a day while I complete 2 final projects. Once I complete these, I will retreat to complete isolation with my dog Max on a total starvation protest in order to bring the Paul James matter to its final conclusion. Extracting a final positive note from the intensity, you have not used my willingness and ability to protest my circumstances through hunger striking as a mental illness when so many others have unscrupulously done so. I appreciate and respect that very much, as I am sure my supporters do also." I was going to give you an example of the stigmatizing cut. I think the Prime Minister's example of not replying for 77 days is a deep cut. So is when I came back from rehab after I spoke to Gold TV and MLSE about the fact that I needed 3 months to address getting well, and that when you look at the sky and see blue, I see grey clouds. Exactly the same information that I gave to York University and to Jen Myers. But when I came back from rehab, I get removed and fired from Gold TV within a couple of weeks. That's a stigmatizing cut. What makes it worse is that I got scapegoated for it on my reporting and analysis on John Carver 12 months earlier, who, when he walked into the change room after being in a game against San Jose, he chastised a Canadian reporter and mentioned that we don't know anything about soccer in Canada. In a subsequent report, I stuck up for that Canadian reporter and myself chastised John Carver. It was good reporting. But a year later, I got scapegoated with that as the reason I was let go from Gold TV. That's not the case. It's because of my health issue and disability. That's what you call a deep line cut. The irony is that John Carver, after I got released, was himself fired 2 months later. And 4 years later, when he was working for Newcastle United, when he took over Newcastle United, they were 11th in the table. When he left, they were bottom of the Premier League, and in that process, he answered to a BBC reporter that he was the best manager in the Premier League. It's an example of the absurdity of some of the things that I've gone through. Another cut would be my 2 assistant coaches that excommunicated not just with me but my sister and my family after they knew about my information, and it was very insincere in what they did. There are many more that I could talk about. I'm in the process of writing them out, and I'm going to disseminate that on Sunday. I thank you for watching. That was a long a recital of a letter, but a very important one. And I appreciate all the support of the Paul James supporters out there who've been absolutely fantastic, and the antithesis of some of the things that have happened to me. I'll let you go now. Thanks ever so much. Bye.